people all over, in most parts of the world that I've explored this with, have a tendency to think first about situations where they were hurt, where somebody used power poorly to hurt them, than situations where they were the causer or the perpetrator of hurt. And there is a human tendency, it appears to be a human tendency, and there's a lot of social psychology research about this now. They're calling it an egocentric bias. It's a type of cognitive bias where people are much more aware of where they get hurt than what the way that they are hurting others. People are much more aware of how things are impacting them from the perspective of their own internal process than they are of an awareness of how they're impacting other people. And I think that this is a huge key to relationship work, that we are more aware of our feelings of being hurt and our experience in the so-called victim role, which is a really important experience, than we are of the ways in which our unconscious use of power impacts other people. Because we're not getting we often don't get the feedback and the reflection of that. I mean, sometimes we do, and more we are, and more, especially in social activist community, but in many parts of the world, power is being called out in a way that it never was called out in the past. And that's a good thing. But in a day-to-day interaction, regardless of what kind of rank you're in, understanding how your power, whether it's a systemic power, a social power, a personal power, but understanding something about how your use of power impacts other people is hugely important. And I think process work has something really, really tremendous to contribute to this area because of our differentiation of power. And I'm assuming that there's like a basic knowledge here that when we talk about power in process work, we differentiate power. We talk about social power, social or systemic power, and then we talk about personal power, and we talk about contextual or positional power, right? And those powers are all relative. And all of us have some kind of a combination of all of those different powers in any moment and in any context. But usually, whatever the moment and whatever the context, we're more aware of the powers that we don't have than the powers that we have. We notice how we're being impacted by others more than we notice our impact on others. Why is that? Why is that? The reason is because most of us have triggers. We're triggered around power. All of us have been children at one point or another in our lives. All of us have been, even if growing up with tremendous privilege, some of us have, some of us haven't. No matter how much privilege you've grown up with and you have currently, just the experience of being a child is a low rank experience. And we know what it's like to be hurt. I don't think anybody ever gets through life without having the experience of being hurt. And the experiences of being hurt have a profound impact on us psychologically. And so we go through life having a trigger around power and a wound around power, and we're more aware of when we're hurt than we are of when we're hurtful. And I think this is a key to relationship, is becoming aware of how how each of our powers impact other people. So let's talk about social powers, personal powers, and contextual powers, because each of them can be tremendously impactful in relationship, but in different kinds of ways. Okay? So social powers are the powers we get. I don't know if I have to go over that. Well, social powers are the powers we get from social designations, being what our gender, our race, our sexual orientation, our religion. If we're mainstream in any way in the cultures that we're living in, we have social powers, right? Our personal powers are internally sourced powers. They're the powers that come from our psychological and our spiritual abilities. We have self-awareness, we have self-love, we have a loving community around us, and we learn how to be resilient. We have skills, relationship skills. We have a connection with something divine. These are all tremendous personal powers that give us an internal source of togetherness or centeredness or skilledness that some people have and other people don't have. And in relationship, oh my God, personal powers have such a profound impact on interpersonal relating. And then there's contextual ranking systems too, like, for example, at work, you know, whether you're a boss or whether you're, you know, an employee, whether you're part of a relationship that, if you're like the head of a family, you know, if you're a parent in a family, you have a contextual rank. Or if, you know, depending, the thing about contextual rank is that it's very, very specific to different situations. Like, you can be in a relationship that has a very specialized contextual ranking system. Like, you could be in a relationship that ranks self-awareness higher than being a good breadwinner, right? Or you could be in a relationship that ranks being healthy above being struggling with health. Or you can be in a, you know, or you can internally, you also internally create your own ranking systems. That's a contextual ranking system that's just internal to yourself. Like, what parts of yourself and what roles do you value and elevate more highly than other roles, right? If you're a mother, for example, do you value the mother role within yourself? And do you walk through life being proud that you're a mother? Or do you undervalue the mother role, but you maybe overvalue like the professional role? And if your profession has been put on hold because you've been mothering, then do you feel disempowered? And then how does that interact with how the world creates a ranking system, right? So your internal ranking system interacts with the social ranking system in a very particular kind of way that then interacts between two people in relationships. So there's this tremendous amount of intersectionality that happens between people in relationship that is so vital to explore, right? Is everybody familiar with the term intersectionality and where that came from? I mean, intersectionality is a term, a sociological theory that was introduced by a critical race theorist named Kimberly Crenshaw Williams in the 1980s. And she was a Black feminist scholar who provided a prism to view the many social identities and how they intersect with each other. For example, so she was a feminist and she was challenging the women's movement because she was saying that for Black women in the United States, the intersection of being female and being Black was very, very different than the struggles faced in the women's movement by white women, right? So she was talking about how different social identities interact and intersect internally to form your identity, and then how you're viewed in the world depending on how those identities intersect, right? Very important, very, very important piece of sociological theory and contribution. And then the amazing thing I think that Orni's work added to that is that he's got us to think about not just the intersection of our social identities and our social powers, but then also the intersection of our personal powers. So the idea that somebody may have a lot of social privilege. They may be, for example, in the United States, a wealthy white male, but then have a very low personal power, having been abused as a child, having maybe never been successful in a career, having an appearance that isn't attractive according to the mainstream standards. So the person feels badly about themselves or has a lot of self-criticism or has a lot of need for love. So the person might have a very, very high social rank, but it's interacting with a very, very low personal power. And that is kind of a recipe for disaster. Because when people are in that kind of situation, witness our world, you see people then using their high social rank or their positional power to get what they want in relationship, as opposed to relying on their personal powers or their relationship skills, okay? So when I work with couples, one of the things I really focus on is these intersecting dynamics. The intersection of social powers and personal powers and contextual powers. And a lot of it is unseen in relationship. A lot of this stuff are things that people don't usually talk about. They're not the issues that people bring up in couples therapy. They're more what's underneath it or what's at the bottom of it. And excavating that and uncovering it and helping people bring these things to awareness is very, very helpful in relationship.